Welcome to Soulful Conversations with Nadjejda. I'm Nadjejda Chapoteau. I am a certified empowerment and confidence coach, spiritual teacher, and speaker. I help purpose-driven and ambitious women entrepreneurs experience ease, clarity, and fun in their businesses by discovering their message and finding their niche. I'm very much passionate about social justice, politics, making a difference specifically in empowering women and children in my homeland, Haiti, and around the world. And also, really, which is very much like with my work, empowering women to find their voice, speak their truth, and share their authentic self boldly with the world. Because I'm a firm believer that's when we can make a difference in the world. I'm really excited today. I have been waiting for what? Has it been like over a month now to have this conversation with these two lovely ladies, my guests. And bear with me, this is my first time doing doing any recording for my podcast or having a conversation with two women. So bear with me. I've always been just one, just the two of us, but now there's three of us today. So my first guest, which is Alexis P. Morgan. Alexis is the pole dancing, sword wielding, democratic socialist on the low-host I hope I'm saying this right, sorceress, excuse me. For English is not my first language. Sorceress you've been warned about. She makes her cheddar as a professional writer, facilitator, artist, ritualist, and priestess. Devoted to truth, justice, and liberation, she lives in the spirit of her four mothers before her, unbossed, unbought, unbothered. Thank you, Alexis. And then joining me again today, and actually she joined me a few months ago, and you guys might recall from last year. I have Siobhan McAuley. She is the founder and CEO of Steering the Soul Consulting, a values-based business that champions women who want to do great work in the world, make shit that matters, and help others along the way. She's a former six-figure business owner in the overcrowded online coaching space. She pulled the plug on her 20K month dream business in order to realign her work with what she values most. Now she teaches other women how to do the same because she believes that the body of work of our life, that a body of work that our life represents does not require us to sacrifice our values to be compensated for the contribution that only we can make in the world. Thank you for joining me today, Siobhan. So ladies, thank you.
Thanks for having us. I'm looking forward to this.
I know. I think we've all been looking forward to this. So, so basically we're going to be talking about the law of attraction, white supremacy, and basically spiritual bypass in the online space. Now, here's how this whole thing got created. Siobhan posted a few months ago, she posted something on Facebook around that line. And then I saw, it was about spiritual bypass and law of attraction. And I recall seeing Alexis's response, which really got my attention because she talked about how, the law of attraction, the way it's being taught by many of the teachers is sort of like, it's very much materialistic, individualistic, and I resonated with that because I remember for a while, although I do listen to some Abraham Hicks stuff sometimes, but I always had, because I've always been about purpose and giving back, and I've experienced that a lot of people that I knew who were big on Abraham Hicks were very much individualistic. They would tell me, why are you thinking about what's going on in Haiti? I'm originally from Haiti. Why am I talking about the stuff that's happening that doesn't, that's, to me, it's not right. It's not, and it's almost as if they were telling me to be thinking about myself only, So when she said that, I was like, oh, I get this. And then there were other things that she shared, which you're going to hear about today, that I was like, I want to hear more about this. And that's how I said, Siobhan, I want to do an episode on this on my podcast. And then I asked her to connect me with some of these women. And then that's how here we are. And I asked her to join us too. So ladies, let me see. Do you want to, Siobhan, since you started the post, do you want to say something about that, and then we could go like around?
Sure. I think, I can't remember now when it was that post went up. I feel like it was like at least 6 or 8 weeks ago or something. But
yes, about, I would say that, yeah.
Things happen in such an accelerated way in the world right now, especially in the online space. So I feel like at that time when I posted it, there was a lot of stuff in my feed in particular that was reflecting, I guess, what we call spiritual bypass when it comes to the law of attraction, and that I personally, I think, was guilty of a lot of that without even realizing it, even though I thought myself to be fairly well informed and fairly well educated. And I'm sure, Alexis, you hear this all the time, you know, from white people who are completely ignorant of their privilege, right? And that was me. And it was Layla's post about wanting to talk to spiritual white women about white supremacy that really woke me up and got me looking at the industry that I'd been a part of from a different perspective. And I had been working on sort of, I guess, what I would call extricating myself from that industry for a good 2 years. But that post really changed the way that I looked at the bigger picture of who I was being and why I was doing what I was doing. So that post was really to open up a conversation, because I felt like there was other people who, like myself, had maybe come into the online space and were sold these wonderful stories of like, make oodles of money and live your dream life, and were disillusioned with the outcome of that. Like what was the reality of that in terms of who you had to be in order to sustain that, and then what the impact was that your life and your decisions were making on the rest of the world. And so, yeah, I guess I think, Alexis, maybe I had connected with you maybe it was through Layla or something, but I'd been following your work a little bit. So I was really happy when you posted on there, because obviously your comment was way more thought out than anybody else's. I think that's something that you really exemplify, is that you take a lot of time to really think deeply before you express yourself. And in the online space, so much of what we experience is very superficial. I think in the world in general, so much of what we experience is very superficial and simplistic. So yeah, we had a lot of really interesting response from that post. And I guess that's what I would say. I would like to hear, I don't even know if anybody has a copy of the post, but if you want to elaborate on what you wrote, or if you remember what you wrote, Alexis.
Do you recall, Alexis?
Yeah, I think I do. It's been a bit. The world has been a little bit on fire in the last couple of weeks, so you know,
yeah.
in one ear out the other. But I basically said that I don't believe in the law of attraction, as a lot of sort of people know it and teach it and sort of share it, and that opinion comes from a variety of perspectives. Part of it is political, and understanding sort of like the power dynamics of society and how society functions in reality. And then other parts of it come from my background, my spiritual and religious background, as well as my magical background. So, and I sort of divide the two, even though they like overlap. And basically, like, the long story short is that the modern concept of the law of attraction comes from, I guess you would call it a metaphysical philosophy, a magical tradition, a religion a little bit, called Theosophy. And I can't remember the exact dates because my memory is garbage. But it basically comes from Theosophy, and Theosophy is like this occult concept that most of these people who are teaching about the law of attraction have never heard of. Like, if I was just like, Helena Blavatsky, they'd be like, Helena who? Which is kind of the point. And basically, theosophy, to make a long story short, there's a lot of Orientalism in it. Like it's basically a hodgepodge of a whole bunch of different concepts that white Europeans found fascinating and attractive from Hinduism and Buddhism and Jainism, and they just sort of like slapped it all together and slapped it on top of like this European, Eurocentric kind of spiritual and philosophical viewpoint. And it also has a couple of questionable instances of like anti-Semitism and racism and sexism, and it's just kind of a hodgepodge of nonsense that philosophically and also just practically doesn't work. And from there, it kind of sprouted into Manly P. Hall, Norman Vincent Peale, who has a connection to our sitting president, God help us, you know, and then turned into Abraham Hicks and like some of the people that we know now who are sort of teaching about like the law of attraction and kind of like positive thinking and all this sort of stuff. And the problem with this is that it's very materialistic. It sort of centers American, well, specifically American flavored capitalism, the capitalism in general, as sort of being like the natural order that's kind of implied by this idea. It's very centered on whiteness. A lot of the techniques of utilizing the law of attraction are contingent upon social privilege and are actually exploiting social privilege. It's not actively doing anything in the universe, which I can talk about from the magical perspective too. But it also centers the individual, and it sort of reinforces this political dogma that the individual is wholly responsible for their entire life and their entire circumstance. And we know for a fact, if you just look around at the universe, it's not true. And what's ironic is that a lot of the people who talk about the law of attraction and like this sort of mindset stuff, also on the flip side of the fence, we'll talk about oneness and like use the language of a lot of like these Eastern philosophies and religions to talk about oneness and love and compassion and kindness and but it doesn't mesh. So part of it was just me like deconstructing all of that and then articulating what I actually believe, and how I sort of see where it works and where it doesn't, from my understanding, as a pan-Germanic heathen and as an active like magician, basically magician, sorceress, whatever. So I was didn't mean to ramble, sorry. But yeah, that was basically what the comment was about.
Okay. So let's ask you now, for you, what would you say, what do you believe in the law of attraction, or like for you, what does it mean to you? Since you talk about, you know, you have your own way, yeah, your own belief on it, your own experience. So I'm curious to find out about that.
Yeah. So I come at this from a couple of different angles. So a little bit of background context that I need to explain is sort of like what pan-Germanic heathen sort of cosmology, so Norse, like the northern, like pre-Christian European traditions sort of think about time and fate. And the long story short is that the Norse believed that time was cyclical, that there was no such thing as like a linear past, present, and future. Everything was going in a cycle. So you could impact, so if you reached into the past, you could, in theory, you could reach into the past and change something in the past, and that would impact the future. You could reach into the future, change something in the future, and it would retroactively impact the past. So they have like this very cyclical notion of time. And in addition to that, they have two different concepts of fate. So they have Weird, which is collective fate, which is everybody and everything in the universe, including the gods, and you know, the dead and our ancestors. And then they have Orleg, which is individual fate. So it's your personal sort of thread of fate in this life. And your Orleg is influenced by Weird. So how you're in, so So basically, oar legs weave together into a tapestry to forms of weird. But your oar leg can be influenced by genetics. It can be influenced by your family and your kin associations. It can be influenced by magic, the land. Like there are a whole bunch of like sort of overlapping influences. But the thing of it is that the Norse didn't believe in an idea of fixed fate or fixed destiny. So your actions in this life could change your fate, but the actions of other people could also impact your fate in ways that you have no control over, or you have very little control over. So it accounts for a sense of free will, but without like negating sort of like the chaotic nature of the universe that seems to kind of order itself regardless. So it's very kind of holistic and balanced in terms of how it looks at how we engage with the world around us. So there's that. And then from a magical perspective, both from hoodoo, which works a lot on sympathetic magic and sort of like sympathetic actions and symbolic actions, but other traditions and techniques and schools that I've studied, I think there is something to symbolic action or ritualized action. So if you do something, obviously something's going to come back. That's how kind of the world works. But there's not a direct, I don't think there's always a direct like causation, correlation. Like I think contemporary law of attraction kind of gets a little bit too literal. Like, oh, if you think bad thoughts, bad things will happen. No, not necessarily. If somebody is inclined to depression, of course it's going to alter their perspective on how they see things, but that also doesn't change systemic racism, sexism, classism, where they're born, the genetics they have, like who their family are, how they're raised, how their people receive them. It changes none of that. It can impact it, but it doesn't it's not the end all be all. So while I think there is something to this whole idea of how we think about the world impacts how we behave in it and interact with it, and that can tip probabilities in favor or against what we want, because that's how I view magic, is tipping probabilities and shaping probabilities. It's not a direct correlation. And one of the ultimate sort of like fatalities of a lot of these law of attraction teachers is they teach it as very like duh, and they take absolutely no sort of like global context into consideration, which means that for marginalized people, a lot of these tools don't work. Isn't it funny how most people who get wealthy with the law of attraction, I'm just putting this out there, are white, able-bodied, straight, and generally presenting as Christian? Isn't it funny? Isn't it funny? Like that's all sort of fall into like the neat little socially acceptable boxes, but you too can use the law of attraction to get ahead. And yeah, so that's what I believe.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, Siobhan, I see you were nodding. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'll give you a little bit of my background, I guess, and how I came to, I guess, understand the law of attraction. So my background was as a yoga teacher for over 15 years. And part of that time I spent living in a yoga center that was originally founded by a guy from India, a guru from India. He developed the center as sort of homage to his teacher. But it was predominantly run by white privileged people who had the advantage of being able to drop out of society, basically, and go do the wise men on the mountain thing, right? And I think in spiritual circles, you know, like I lived as a sabbatical resident in the community for 2.5 years, and we're very much sort of taught that, you know, if we're choosing this spiritual path, then we have to let the rest of the world fall away. But in, you know, traditional practice, there's very much a distinction between the renunciate and the householder. And, as a sabbatical resident, the idea was that we were sort of letting go of our worldly obligations, and we were providing service to the community. And in exchange, we were being supported by the community. So for a couple of years, I didn't have any bills, and everything was taken care of, and somebody cooked all my meals, and I worked in the community as my contribution. So it was during that time that I first learned about Abraham Hicks. And I guess prior to that, I was already aware of theosophy because I had studied some of Rudolf Steiner's work. Ouspensky, I was always reading and studying different things and sort of drawing the connections and parallels myself. So I was familiar with some of that, but it wasn't until I got into the online space that I really started to look more closely at the law of attraction through a body of work that's generally referred to as the universal laws. I've never been able to figure out who created the universal laws. There's just lots of people who wrote about the universal laws, and there seems to be some sort of codified body of work that says there's 22 laws in total, 11 of them are subsidiary laws, and but who decided that? I don't know. I never figured it out. I read lots of books about it. I'm well versed on a variety of different universal laws, more so than most people. I did 33 episodes of a podcast dissecting a book called Working with the Laws. But what I found with all of the work around universal laws was it was very, first of all, the language was very archaic. All of the sort of money mindset Bibles, Science of Getting Rich, Think and Grow Rich, all of these books were written roughly around the 40s and 50s or early 1920s, 1910s. Predominantly were written by men. The language is very God-centric, and it's for white people. That's the bottom line. It's all white people, right? So when I was doing that book study on working with the laws, part of what I was trying to do was explore for myself, what the fuck does this actually mean? Like, I was really trying to figure it out because so much of the language is very archaic and it's sort of written in disguise almost. Like, you have to have a secret access pass to have the person who's going to interpret the teachings for you. And in that way, it really promotes this capitalist success stream, sort of like a pyramid scam almost, right? Okay, you'll get access to one law, but this law doesn't work unless you have all these other laws, but you have to pay me to know what these other laws are. And every time you learn a new law, then you have to pay me more money to learn the next one. And at the same time that you're sort of being given this storyline that you have to be dependent on someone else for the answers that you're looking for to solve the problem, to eliminate the pain in your life, or whatever it is, you're also being told a lot of the time that you have to then turn around and perpetuate that belief in brokenness and pain and suffering for other people. And so I guess what I see as being the shift in perception around law of attraction. The basic average person is reading it, and because it's very generalized, like Alexis said, it has this very broad, overarching scope. Anyone can do this, right? But it's also very discriminatory in the sense that it's like, oh, well, you're the sum total of the 5 people you spend the most time with, so make sure you get rid of everybody in your life who's depressed, doesn't have any money, and can't show up the way you need them to so that you can keep succeeding. So it really turns us against each other in that prescription. So the distinction that I see is that if we're operating using the law of attraction from that perspective, where we haven't really given it any critical thought ourselves, we haven't inquired as to, like, why am I doing this? Who am I required to be in order to do this? What is the resulting impact in my life and on the world if I do this? Because we haven't actually done any of that, we're coming from what I call ego orientation, which means that basically we're facing out, looking out at the world and the whole experience. If we were standing around a tree in a circle, but we were all facing outward, none of us would actually see the tree. We'd all just see what's out there. We wouldn't even see each other. And so everything is about, what do I need to do to get what I need to survive? And our life is very oriented around this. I've got to get what I need from out there. But if we turn around and we face in towards the center of the circle and we face the tree, this is what I call soul orientation. If we're all looking at the tree, we can all agree, hey, that's a tree. But everybody has their own unique perspective looking at the tree. And your perspective and my perspective and Alexis' perspective, that's what I would say, the way that we would describe how the tree looks to us, how we experience the tree, that would be our values. So your values might be creativity and innovation, and Alexis's values might be service and truth, and my values might be communication and sovereignty. So, but we're all looking at a tree, and we all agree that we're seeing a tree. And so this is the big distinction that I see, is that law of attraction in and of itself is not a problem. The concept that we have power in our mental thoughts to create an experience for ourselves and the whole world. Like we've all had that experience where, you know, positive expectancy, where somebody says you're going to fall in love with a man with red hair. And then every time you see a guy with red hair, you're like, oh, is he the one? But we're like kind of attracting that experience to us, not because the guy with the red hair wasn't there, just that we're available to see it now because it's part of our field of experience. Our field of experience has actually opened up to include that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that explains it for me, but I feel like the big distinction is like whether we're operating through this ego orientation or whether we're operating through the soul orientation. And that the whole world pretty much operates on ego orientation, but consciousness is evolving towards, like, instead of facing outward where everybody has to be broken and we get sold the solution to fix the problems that somebody else convinces us we have, all of that is transitioning away, which is why we're seeing all this, you know, shadow coming up in the collective all around the world in order to get all of humanity to turn inward rather than to look outward for the answers.
Totally. I see you were nodding, Alexis.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing that, because I think I sort of went for the mechanics and you went for the lens, and I agree with that lens. Like, because my thoughts on the law of attraction have always been that, and this probably comes from my background in chaos magic, because the whole thing with chaos magic is that magic is all internal. It's all in your head. Yeah. And it's like all about like that inner sort of relationship. And I think that's true. I think that's part of, you know, how that sort of arena of life works to a certain degree. And I think that's what ultimately the law of attraction is about. What we sort of open ourselves to is what we can perceive and receive. And that's also based on what we've experienced in life and like where we are in that path, and sort of like the other context around us and around our fate, which is both in our hands but also not in our hands. So what we are able to sort of conceptualize and how we can conceptualize those things is contingent upon like all these other factors. So for a white guy who lives in a society that tells him, hey, you white gentleman, you can do and have anything you want, you know, like, like it's going to be far more effective for him to sort of pry open his expectations and his ability to sort of have faith and to continue and to ask for things or to pursue things or whatever it might be, or to operate with that conviction and be received well for doing so, which I think is also a distinction. And see like these wild successes versus me, who, if I walked into a room with some of those same expectations, you know, I could lose my job, or I could miss out on a job interview because people interpret my attitude and my personality in a completely different context than they would his. So I think we sort of like went for the lens, and then me over here was like the nuanced mechanics of all of this. But I totally agree. I think it's about people like not being willing. I think part of it is not being willing to see the hard things, like the painful things. So like we do have to deal with like, you know, global wealth inequality and sort of how we've trashed poor Mother Earth. I literally was watching a video this morning talking about the proliferation on planet of plastic, the proliferation of plastic on the planet. and how like I think they said by 2050 there will literally be no place on planet Earth that hasn't been touched by plastic. So, you know, like these really like huge problems that have sort of been created by a select few sort of like manipulating systems, or groups of people manipulating systems or philosophies for their own various gains for a variety of reasons, for better and for worse. You know, it is what it is now. Like I can't go back in time and fix that. You know, it's really hard to sort of like grapple with the intensity and the scale of, you know, these things. So it's much easier to sort of like take these tools and sort of wrap them around us as a blanket and go, if I just focus on myself, I'll be fine. And that's all I need to do to fix the planet is be fine. And, you know, it sort of takes the existential edge off, you know, to just kind of think only happy thoughts and think about whatever it might be. So
I actually think that we've been largely conditioned to not even recognize that we're not thinking. Like we don't know how to think critically anymore. We're not taught how to do that in schools. What we're taught to do is to regurgitate a history that we've been sold in order to maintain a narrative, perpetuate a system, you know, so we don't even really know how to do that anymore. And, you know, like the whole fake news thing, right? Like everything is manipulated, everything is manufactured. So unless you're really somebody who is connected to what I say is what's most meaningful to you, like the community of people that I work with, I refer to us as meaning makers, because largely we go through life allowing everyone else to assign meaning for us. But we have the right as human beings to decide what holds meaning for us. But we've just neglected to use that because we've been conditioned not to. That's how we've been sort of trained into a factory worker mindset, right? Mm. So I like to think that the majority of people don't even realize they're conscious of that. Just like white people like myself not recognizing my privilege because I'm so entrenched in a system. I'm so entrenched in a consciousness that I can't see it. It's too close, right? But I like to hope that humanity is on this evolutionary arc, that everything in the universe is continuously evolving, expanding, growing, seeking to know its consciousness. I feel like that is the purpose, is for consciousness to know itself. And you know, our bodies, human beings, are just the vehicle through which that consciousness is manifesting. So the systems are all fucked up, but we're all part of the systems. And, you know, so I feel like for me personally, it felt like the best service that I could provide would be to help people to recognize their inability to think critically and to empower them to want to start to assign meaning for themselves so that they could live a life and build a business based on what was actually uniquely of value to them, and use that as a vehicle to demonstrate it in the world. Because there's this huge disconnect that happens in the online space where we're sold this idea of, you know, you can empower women to be financially independent, you can change the world. But then who we actually need to be to do that, and the systems we have to be a part of, and the oppression that we have to contribute to, and the brokenness that we have to perpetuate, all of that is not taken into account. And the reality is you can have the best intention, but the outcome is not a matching picture.
As my tattoo says, impact over intent.
What is it? I didn't hear you. What did you say?
I have a tattoo on my wrist that says impact over intent, and I can't like get it to look decent on camera. But yes.
Yeah, you know, so I wanted to just do a quick recap. So what I got from what you guys were saying, is you guys are the expert in this topic, is basically I'm hearing Siobhan talked about basically the way the law of attraction many times is being taught is very ego-driven. And she's talking about going through the soul. And what Alexis is sharing is basically you agreed with her and you were sharing how the law of attraction, also the way it's being taught, it's not being realistic to people like minorities, like Alexis and I, you know, women of color. people who are not straight, you know, so they're not looking into that. So there's something where you were talking about, I think it was Alexis, and you kind of talked about it too, Siobhan. And I wanted I think it was Alexis, and you mentioned it too, is sort of like this thing of like focusing on me. It's like really being in a bubble. And for me, I think that's where this whole spiritual bypass is. Because I know a lot of people say, oh, don't focus about what's going on out there. You need to take care of you. You need to focus on yourself. And that's how we change the world.
Yeah.
So in some way, it's almost like we're being told, do not talk about all the oppression. Don't talk about the racism, the discrimination. Don't talk about any of it, the political stuff that's happening, net neutrality that they're taking away or anything. It's like you have to focus about, you know, only focus about transforming yourself. So that's what you call the spiritual bypass, right? Mm-hmm. Or I don't know, I'm curious.
Can you speak to that first, Alexis?
Oh, no, I was just, first of all, I was just nodding along and listening. But yes, it is spiritual bypassing, where you basically take like spiritual language and just kind of like use it to mollywop people who are suffering or who are experiencing emotional or physical distress, and they basically go, yeah, it's not my problem. And I mean, like, obviously, like, there are some circumstances where it is very appropriate to say, not my circus, not my monkeys, you know, and just kind of keep it moving. But most of the time, you know, it's not about, we just sort of extricate ourselves from something difficult without actually thinking about whether or not we should or we should be doing that. And I was actually thinking about, in terms of just like the orientation and sort of how we relate, sort of focusing on how the law of attraction sort of focuses on individuals. And sorry, my brain is a little slow today. So in Yoruba tradition specifically, when a baby is born, they have their unique sort of essence, or their unique gifts that they come into the world with. However, those gifts are always related to in the context of community. So the individual sort of fulfilling their ultimate sort of like potential, or, you know, cultivating their potential, which is what I like to say, cultivating potential versus fulfilling potential, you know, is always done in service of the community. It's not, you know, done independent of it. So there's always a community orientation on individualism. So the fully actualized individual does so in service of the community. It does so, but not at the expense of the community. Everything's always kind of like interlocked and interrelated like that. And that's the perspective I hold, like, in terms of using the law of attraction and sort of operating in this space, is that it's useful in terms of cultivating sort of like the individual, but it's the individual in the context of society, not at the expense of society. So I want to do X, but then you run it through a filter of, does this hurt other people, and does this hurt the planet? And if you hit yes at either one of those steps or both of those steps, then perhaps we shouldn't do that, or we should like reframe how we're going to do that, and we should take a look as to whether or not those values are sustainable and, you know, kind and like generative, or however you want to put it. But yeah, that's just me. Like, I could be totally wrong there, but yeah.
Well, yeah. I agree. I think there's I think one of the flaws of the fatal, or of the law of attraction, or maybe this is actually an intended consequence or impact of it, is that it's all built on what Lynn Twist refers to as the management of scarcity. Lynn Twist wrote the book, The Soul of Money, which this is very interesting. And probably about 30 years ago, women started writing, or there were women who were writing 30 years ago, quite deliberately and intentionally about our relationship to resources from a very different perspective. And yet it's only now kind of really starting to build any kind of capacity or momentum in the overall conversation in the world. So Lynn Twist's book, The Soul of Money, just came out for like a 30th anniversary edition. But one of the things she talks about is this idea of the management of scarcity. So like the law of attraction is a really great whipping post for anybody who's like driven by the ego, which is continuously convincing us that whatever we need, we're already without, it's not already within our possession, and that we have to go out there and we have to get it from someone else. Like this is a big sort of differentiator between orienting ourselves in the world through the ego's lens perception or through the soul. From the soul's lens perception, we're not operating from duality. We're operating from a place that we are actually all one, and we already do possess everything we need. There is what Lynn refers to as a sufficiency that exists at all times. And that sufficiency doesn't require us to continuously go out there and get more and get more and get more and get more. It just requires us to recognize what's already available. But the majority of the world is operating from this perspective where we're turned outward. So we think that, oh, I can't take care of myself. I can't like grow my own vegetables and be provided for on this piece of land or from this community or from this group of people supporting each other. I have to go out there and I have to take it away from someone else. And then when I have that, I know it's in limited supply. So I've got to go out and I have to get more. And it's continuous. Like, so there is this addictive anxiety that I think the entire world is suffering from right now. And most people are not even aware of it, that our behavior is just largely driven by a need to continuously get more. We're consuming not just like as consumers, we're consuming food, we're consuming land, we're consuming emotions, like we're consuming everything endlessly. We're just constantly stuffing ourselves with more and more and more and more to try and fill the void of this separateness, which is essentially, it's an existential thing. It's a consciousness thing, right? When what consciousness wants is for us to recognize, like if we just turn our attention inward again, we become aware that the thing that we were seeking was already here with us. So I think there's all kinds of stages in that conversation, in that transformation. And it's important for, you know, whatever part of that transition in consciousness, that evolution of consciousness that we can understand or grasp or articulate, it's really important for us to share that, to contribute that to the world, because, you know, somebody might not hear what I'm saying, but they'll hear what Alexis is saying and vice versa, right? And so every person who just gets, like, for a moment, an opportunity to turn away from this outward orientation and bring themselves back into the fold, the systems begin to change that are upholding that consciousness to begin with. My strategy is just to unfollow everybody on social media who says anything that I think is garbage.
What? Who says anything?
I have to say, my social media thread is like so much more enjoyable now. Though,
No,
right?
but you said you unfollow anybody. What? I didn't hear.
Well, like anybody who's promoting law of attraction used in that way, anybody who's promoting this capitalist model of, like, you know, I have to take something from you in order for me to get what I want, and I'm going to step over everybody along the way to get it. Anyone who's like not willing to have a conversation about what's going on in the rest of the world and, you know, helping other people because they're so hell-bent on fulfilling this addictive anxiety that's driven by this belief in scarcity, right? Like there's a lot of conversation that's about, oh yeah, you can have everything you want, but it's all fueled by this fear and anxiety of scarcity. You know, like when you don't have anything, you're just not that scared because you don't have anything to lose. But when you have a lot, it becomes very nerve-wracking. It's very difficult. You know, I really feel badly for people who have a lot of money. I know going from earning $20,000 a year to earning $20,000 a month, you know, it cost me $15,000 to earn $20,000. And then I was now all of a sudden I had to earn that much money. And it was like, it was crazy making. I didn't want to be that person, you know? I would rather do more with less money and be more creative, work within those creative constraints to create the kind of world that I want to live in, to be the kind of person that I want to be, and to, you know, help others along the way in that process. Like I think about times in my life when, I'd spend years not paying rent because I found creative workarounds where I'd go and I'd, house sit on someone's farm for them. I'd clean out their outbuildings in exchange for a car. I'd take care of their kids in exchange for rent and get them on the school bus, and that was far more fulfilling. And there was no anxiety or stress that was associated with my life. There was no worry or fear. Everybody was taken care of. Everybody was supporting each other. I don't think a lot of people using law of attraction have any of that sense of connection. And because they don't have that, I don't think they have any real sovereignty, because everything is dependent on them getting it from somewhere else.
Totally. Okay, so this is, hold on 1 second.
Okay, well, as you can tell, we have a whole lot more that we want to talk about in this topic. I thought it would be a great time to cut it up, to stop it for today, because I didn't want it to stretch for too much longer. I'd rather have it in 2 episodes, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So as you can see, we're going to come back to talking about spiritual bypassing, the law of attraction, and white supremacy. We'll keep with Alexis P. Morgan and Siobhan McAuley. So I hope you have found this helpful. For me, this was really a whole lot of learning. I really wanted to find out more about this topic. So I brought in these 2 experts who to share with me and really teach me. And, I'm listening and I'm learning, and I'm taking it all in. So I hope you will join us next week for the next episode, where Siobhan McAuley and Alexis P. Morgan will be joining us, and we'll be continuing this important and powerful discussion. And if you are not subscribed to my email list, if you haven't subscribed to Soulful Conversations with Nadjejda on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, which is iTunes, then I'm inviting you to go ahead now and subscribe, leave us a review. And if you do want to get the episode right on your inbox and you want to watch us, which is on my website, I'm inviting you to join my email list. Visit my website, www.lovelightcoaching.com. Click on Soulful Conversations in the menu, Soulful Conversations with Nadjejda. And below the video, and those of you who are watching me on my website, below the video after Alexis and Siobhan's information, you'll see the box where you can subscribe to my email list so that you can get those episodes delivered directly in your inbox, and put in your name, your email address, and go ahead and subscribe. And you'll also get, just letting you know, you'll get my free gift, 7 questions to help you reconnect with yourself and have an aligned message in your business. If you don't have a business, I still think it will work really well for you, because it really helps you reconnect with who you are, with your inner child, knowing who. So if you find that you're not clear what your message is, you want to make an impact in the world, you want to share your story, your message is still something that is very much important for you. So I invite you to do it and take advantage of my free offer. And I also want to thank Siobhan and Alexis. Thank you so much for sharing yourselves with us. And I can't wait to get back to having this conversation with you all, which actually, obviously, you're going to notice we did tape it all at once, the same day, but we just, I thought it would be best to have it into 2 episodes, and I thought it would be a great one to feature this month. Thank you. Love and light. Take care.